So si outgoing Senator Francis Tolentino, when he gave a speech, he brought up the something called the Jefferson's Manual of Parliamentary Practice, which is found in the Constitution in the States. Ang argument niya was this clause says hindi pwede tumawid yung impeachment across Congresses. You have a different take on it. Talk us through that.
Yes, I think when Senator Tolentino referred to Jefferson's manual, he was referring to this more general clause na legislative business cannot continue beyond Congress or a parliament. And that's correct, right? If you have a pending bill in the 19th Congress, it really can't continue, let's say, kung second reading na siya now, it can't continue as second reading in the 20th. It has to be refiled. But I think Senator Tolentino may have overlooked two provisions or two sections of Jefferson's manual, which I write in this piece in the Philippine Law Journal, which was also released yesterday, where there was really an explicit mention that impeachment can be dealt with by the next Congress. So the dissolution of Parliament does not result in the discontinuation of impeachment. So it can continue despite or the shift in Congress that we're expecting to happen on June 30.
So almost parang hindi niya binasa in full or something, or mali yung interpretation niya is what?
Si Jefferson ang binabasa niya. May kaunting kaibahan. Kaya nga hiniwalay yung articles of impeachment, hiniwalay sa 87 Constitution dun sa definition ng Senate as a legislative body. Hiniwalay siya dahil accountability yan eh. Accountability at very specific yung nakalagay doon sa accountability, no? Korte ka na eh. Sui generis yung sinasabi nila. Kaya baka okay naman na may kinuha tayo sa US system, pero meron ding kaibahan, no? Lalo na yung mga discussions mismo doon sa 87 Constitution. Yun ang mas mahalaga, no? Kaya hindi naman na en toto ginaya natin yung US system. Bagamat may mga kinuha tayo ron.
Yes. I think that's correct. No? I mean, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, they deal with impeachment in the same article as they deal with the legislative branch. So Article 1 yan for them. And in the Philippines, we have a special article on accountability of public officers, where impeachment is not addressed to Congress. It's addressed to the Senate and the House, which means that may sense that they transcend to a higher body when they deal with these issues of impeachment. But even if we look at the source that cited and was mentioning yesterday, it's clear from that source itself that even Jefferson looked into this issue and said himself that if you look at parliamentary practice, pwede tumawid. No? So I think they may have, or the team of Senator Tolentino may have overlooked that particular provision of Jefferson's manual.
Kainuman kasi ng lolo ko si
iba-ibang
Jefferson.
interpretation yan. Is it open to interpretation?
Parang
hindi
hindi
kasi ngayon dito sa sui generis na anything goes na eh. Pwede bang ganun yun? Wala bang mga baseline dyan na hindi pwedeng baguhin?
I think there's a temptation to look at it as open to everything. We only have impeachment trials once every decade. And therefore, wala tayong robust practice on how these things are done. But what scholars invite the Senate to consider is that these provisions in the Constitution, kahit hindi laging malinaw yung sinasabi nila, just always read it with the lens of accountability. What is the interpretation of these provisions that will further constitutional accountability? And it seems that delaying the trial or even canceling it entirely, despite what the Constitution says, doesn't really seem to further that idea of accountability.
Yeah. Actually, I took a screenshot of that particular page on the article that you wrote for the Law Journal, and the exact phrasing here is, an impeachment is not discontinued by the dissolution of Parliament, but may be resumed by the new Parliament. That seems to be the key phrase here. That to me is clear as day.
By Senator Tolentino.
Yun na nga eh. So that to me, when I read that, is clear as day, and I don't know why the differing interpretation or where the differing interpretation is coming from. Kasi klaro naman yung words. even for non-lawyers like us?
Yeah, it's many possible reasons. For one is, it's an American source, so baka hindi masyadong familiar yung Philippine researchers with it. The second might be it's not a short document, so it's a very thick document of parliamentary procedure. And unless you were looking for this very specific item, it's easy to lose. So maybe reading it in the best light.
At saka siyempre, tinitingnan nila yan sa lens kung ano yung kanilang political objective. No? Na i-influensyahan yan ng kanilang lens. Kung ang position naman talaga nila, wag matuloy ang impeachment, so i-interpret nila yan in such a way. Diba?
That's what's sad about this. It was meant to be a political exercise. Pero nahaluan na ng partisan politics is what
Well,
we're
the
saying.
Philippines, everything is political. Yun ang problema.
Ikaw naman, para ka nasa ibang planeta. Ibang bansa yan.
Hindi, kababalik lang niya ng Pilipinas. Pasensya mo
Oo
na.
nga.
Dati si Ronald, ibang kuweba lang ina-accuse sa akin. Ngayon, ibang planeta na.
Actually, Reg raises an interesting point about the apolitical exercise. If you look at the history of impeachment, it's always been considered as somewhat political. It's why we don't high the standards of judges. But in the Philippines, there's a unique development where the Senate takes an oath to remain politically neutral during impeachment.
Yeah.
So I think they recognize themselves, when you do this very rare task of seeing whether this person should be removed from office or this high public official should be disqualified forever, parang it calls to your better sense of looking at the Constitution objectively, looking at the evidence objectively. And to a certain extent, I guess, because lawyers are by nature trained to fight for certain positions, it's very hard to remain neutral on this procedural issue of whether it can cross to the next Congress.
Tsaka yung oath kasi is one of the weakest element ng ating mga politicians.
Yes.
Hindi pa nga sila nag-o-oath di ba? Wala pang oath dyan sa impeachment
Nagsabi na sila.
Pinagawa lang nila yung gown nila. Kaya wala pa. Nagpagawa pa lang ng gown para sa oath-taking.
The reading of the
Umupa lang
charges.
yata, umupa.
The reading of the charges was meant to be yesterday, tapos na move to June 11. In your view, not clearly, but in your view, has this violated the spirit of the Constitution? The fact that June na, hindi pa rin nasa start, and recall that Vice President Duterte was impeached on February 25, if I recall correctly. February.
Well,
27.
27. Basta February, yes.
to be frank, the Constitution gives a lot of power to the Senate on how to hold the trial. And if it sees on its own honest assessment that this is proceeding forthwith, then sa kanila yun, it's our job as voters to not vote them into office if they violate that duty. But I do think that the spirit of the Constitution has been breached in a sense, because if you look at the drafting history of the 87 Constitution, mas mahaba yung impeachment provisions dyan than any other previous Philippine Constitution. And it's precisely because right before Marcos Sr. was removed from office, there was an impeachment attempt. And there were attempts within the House, or within the Batasang Pambansa, napatulugin din yung impeachment. So the 87 Constitution purposely included, strange provisions on periods, on when it should start, kung gaano siya dapat kabilis, that when the House receives a complaint, it's referred within a certain number of business days, Committee on Justice, because the framers understood that it could be abused by discretion. And yet I think, you see that ultimately, the Constitution relies also on public officials doing their job honestly in order for the systems of checks and balances to work.
And just very quickly, Attorney, since you're saying that na-breach na yung spirit of the Constitution, we are still a democracy. What can the people do? Can anyone just file a complaint to that effect? The fact that the Senate has not exercised its duty.
Yeah, so it's not that type of duty, I think, in the Constitution. It's moral duty that's given to the senators to start the trial right away. but it's not something, in my view at least, that can be immediately enforced in court. There might be circumstances in the future that will call for that, but maybe now is not the time yet. So the real solution is when these people are up for ballot, again, when in the next election, is to think about what they have done with regard to the question of impeachment.
Doon sila
And
hatulan.
doon sila hatulan. Yun yung design talaga ng sistema natin.
Except, don't we all have a short memory?
Oh yes, so that's another matter. So,
Well, we will constantly remind voters.
I will leave that there for now. Thank you so much for your insights and for joining Storycon
Yeah.
today. UP College of Law Assistant Professor Paolo Tamase.
Sana maimbita namin kayo uli, attorney.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Atty.
Thank you.